Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the life of the legendary Native American medicine man and healer, Rolling Thunder. With me is Professor Stanley Krippner, the Alan Watts Professor of Psychology at Saybrook University, the author of over 1,000 academic papers, the editor or co-author of dozens of important books, including The Voice of Rolling Thunder. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you.
I knew Rolling Thunder. I had the privilege of interviewing him many years ago, and he was your good friend for over 20 years.
Yes, that's right.
He was a legendary person in many ways. I mean, you, for example, met him, as I recall, through your association with the Grateful Dead.
That's correct. That's correct. I was visiting Mickey Hart at his ranch many, many years ago, and he said, you know, you should meet this friend of mine who's a Native American medicine man. His name is Rolling Thunder. And I'd love to meet him. And I've been interested in Native Americans all my life. So the next time I visited Mickey's ranch, he had a private plane pick up Rolling Thunder and fly him to the ranch for a weekend. And that is how we met. But even before that, I had been extremely interested in Native Americans because, like all my other professional interests, it all goes back to my childhood. I was raised on a farm in Wisconsin, and even before my father had a tractor, he would plow the field with a horse and a plow and would unearth Native American arrowheads. So I had an arrowhead collection. And that led me into the study of the Potawatomi Indians who inhabited that area. And as time went on, I got to meet some Native American leaders, especially when I was living in New York City, and got to know Grandmother Twyla Nitsch, a Seneca medicine woman. And so when Mickey told me that he was good friends with the medicine man, of course I was eager to meet him. So the next time I was living in New York, of course, I visited California. Whenever I visited San Francisco, I would stay at Mickey's ranch. And on that particular occasion, there was going to be a sort of a dry run of some new music. And when the Grateful Dead performed new music, it was always under a different name, even though everybody knew it was the Grateful Dead. But if the music bombed, they couldn't have to be pinned down as being responsible for it. That night they performed under the name Mickey Hart and his Heartbeats. I don't think that band ever performed again under that name. But during the intermission, down the aisle came this middle-aged, handsome Native American gentleman with a white buckskin suit, beads, and a beautiful woman on each arm. And I thought to myself, that must be Rolling Thunder, and indeed it was. So I came up to him, I said, you must be Rolling Thunder. He said, you must be Dr. Krippner. That was a beautiful friendship as its beginning. We went back to the ranch. I didn't have a chance to talk to Rolling Thunder that night because he was busy with his newfound beautiful women guests.
I see.
And I didn't have a chance to talk to the Native American braves he brought with him because they were around the campfire having fun with the LSD that Mickey had given them.
Oh, my.
Yes, so that was quite a night, and I was left out of both the sex and drugs, so I occupied myself with rock and roll, listening to a new record that Mickey had cut. So that was how I met Rolling Thunder. And then one thing simply led to another, and I should say, before I forget it, that one of the highlights of our relationship was the symposium that some friends of mine set up at University of New Mexico, Las Cruces. Yes. And they had Alan Watts, Rolling Thunder, and I the same 3 days. Each of us gave individual presentations and workshops, and then we had a joint symposium. And Rolling Thunder and Alan Watts just hit it off beautifully. Much of their philosophy was very, very similar.
How interesting. Alan Watts, of course, being known as a Zen Buddhist philosopher.
That's right. And very much interested in an expert on Eastern religions. And Rolling Thunder, when he had his spiritual community in Nevada, was very adamant he didn't want his Native American teachings to be compromised by missionaries coming in and preaching different varieties of Western religions.
Well, in fact, Rolling Thunder wrote an introduction to one of your books in which he talked about your relationship with him, and he indicated that at first, before he got to know you, he was pretty distrustful of Western psychologists.
Absolutely, yes. Well, we took care of that in a hurry because he was very sympathetic to what we call humanistic psychology, which is very multicultural in nature.
Yes.
And he would allow one thing to be taught at his ranch, at his camp, and that was Taoism and the Eastern martial arts. Ken Cohen, who was a specialist on Native American medicine, was always a guest at Rolling Thunder's ranch and would always teach classes on Taoism and the martial arts, and Rolling Thunder saw no big contradiction there at all.
So he was, in effect, running a little growth center.
He was, in effect, running a little growth center for 10 years called Metaton, Live in Peace. I had many adventures at Metaton. The Grateful Dead bought the land for him, by the way.
Oh.
And he'd always wanted to have a healing center or a growth center where he could teach people how to practice Native American ways and nurse people back to health with Native American herbs and ceremonies and sweat lodges and all of that. And one of my memorable experiences was going out late at night. One night he said, "Stanley, come with me, I want to show you something." So I just went out late at night to the edge of his property where his property ended and the woods began, and he became very vocal. Hoot, 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 hoot. I would never be surprised at anything RT did.
Yeah.
Other people would think he's gone off his rocker.
RT is what you called Rolling Thunder.
Yes, thank you, RT, Rolling Thunder. Out of the woods came a hoot, 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 and within a few minutes a pack of coyote came out of the woods.
Oh.
And the leader of the pack came right up to us, so close I could have reached out and patted his head, which I didn't, but I could have, that close. And he and Rolling Thunder hooted back and forth for a few minutes. And then the coyote went back into the woods. I said, "RT, what's that all about?" He said, "Well, every so often we have to renew our pact. We'll agree that we will not shoot and kill the coyotes. They agree that they won't raid our chicken coops." And for all those 10 years that Metaton existed, there was no coyote raid against the chicken coop, which was the main reason why farmers in the area killed coyote, because the coyotes were notorious for eating chicken.
Well, what you're getting at here is this uncanny relationship Rolling Thunder had with nature itself.
Yes, right.
And I had some experience of that because when I interviewed him many years ago in the San Francisco Bay Area, which for people who live there, they will know it rains in San Francisco, but we almost never, ever see lightning in that area. But the day that Rolling Thunder arrived for our interview, we had a thunderstorm and there was lightning all night long, which has never happened in my memory any other time.
Very typical. I've heard that report also. He had this uncanny ability to interact with nature.
Yeah.
Now, Native Americans don't go into the cause and effect paradigm that Westerners do. They look at interaction effects. So I'm not saying rolling thunder caused the lightning and thunder, but there was an interaction there that I've heard many, many times, where he was present, and upon his arrival there would be lightning and thunder.
Well, I also interviewed Doug Boyd, who wrote a book about rolling thunder. Doug Boyd, as I recall, was the adopted son of Elmer Green, the well-known physiological psychologist, one of the pioneers of biofeedback.
That's right.
And as I recall, Doug Boyd, in his interactions with rolling thunder, witnessed something very strange, where rolling thunder found some bugs, I think they were June bugs, out in the desert, and he would take a little twig and tickle the June bugs, and he said that's what caused the lightning to strike. And Doug Boyd witnessed it. He'd be tickling the June bugs, and there'd be thunder and lightning as a result.
How about that? Yeah, Doug Boyd, unfortunately, is no longer with us. He wrote some marvelous books.
Yeah.
And the book that he wrote about rolling thunder was a result of me introducing the two of them. And Doug Boyd was so struck by rolling thunder, he asked if he could come and visit. He went out and stayed with the rolling thunder for several months, and the book was the result of that interaction.
Yeah.
And marvelous book, highly recommended.
But the idea that by tickling a June bug, you're going to cause lightning and thunder, it totally defies the Western mindset.
It surely does. That's right. It really does. Another memory I have of Metaton is that when the Grateful Dead bought this land, it was beautiful land with mountains, the background, a shrub of vegetation that the cows came out of, a little forest to the side, but no water. So Rolling Thunder took his dowsing stick and found a well. And I know that well existed because he showed it to me when I visited him. And then he said, now we need some water on the other side too. Found another well. Now those wells had been dug shortly before I came, and I had a chance to see both of them. I saw no potholes. In other words, it was not trial and error. The place where he said there's water, the first place his people dug, they found water, both sides of the camp. Yeah, so they had plenty of water, plenty of spring water for their drinking and bathing and their food.
And in Nevada, that's not always the case.
No, especially in the desert area of Nevada. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So I also was able to get Rolling Thunder invited to give a symposium in Germany. And he not only gave a symposium for a standing room only group of people. Literally, they came from all over Germany. It was such a big event. And I was called upon to introduce him, which, of course, was a pleasure. And he gave a very, very eloquent talk. And following the talk, we did a joint workshop. So I did my personal mythology workshop where I had people examine their beliefs to see if they were conducive to a happier form of life. And then Rolling Thunder came after I did. This was a 3-day workshop. It was very long, and we did it half and half. And he said, everything that Dr. Krippner told you is what I believe, so I'm glad you paid attention to him. Very great compliment on my part. So then he took people through a lesson on natural foods, natural eating, and of course he many, many times predicted the ecological crisis that we're now in.
Yes.
In terms of the way that the water was being polluted, that the lands were eroding, that the desertification was taking place, that the air was being contaminated. He saw all of that way back from the time that I first met him.
And I think, if I remember correctly, he was a bit bitter about it, about what had happened, not only to the planet, but to his people, to Native Americans.
Yes. Oh, he was very militant, absolutely. Very militant, and he would really raise hell against the practice, which was common at that time, about Native American children being forcibly taken from their homes and being adopted by white parents. Mm-hmm. And in our book, The Voice of Rolling Thunder, we describe that, and of course you'll never guess who was instrumental in ending that, and that was President Richard Nixon, who did a lot for Native Americans. He did a lot of bad things for the country as a whole, but yes, he was very, very kind to Native Americans, and several pieces of legislation were passed to protect Native Americans under his watch.
Well, it was a time in which the American Indian movement was gaining strength.
Well, it coalesced with the AIM, the American Indian Movement, and of course Rolling Thunder made several appearances at the takeover of Alcatraz Island, and was very much revered by people in AAM as a mentor and as an elder. Mm-hmm. And, of course, that generation was much younger than Rolling Thunder, but he certainly cannot be faulted. One of the very ingenious things that he did, even before there was the American Indian Movement, was to make a stand against the way that bulldozers were coming in the middle of the night and tearing down the pinon nut trees. Pinon nuts are a high source of protein and a good source of food for poor Indians. Mm-hmm. There was law against that, but the bulldozers, were clearing the land so it could be used for agriculture and buildings and development and all of that. And Rolling Thunder's group wanted raid on the bulldozers, if that meant shooting and killing the driver, so be it. Mm-hmm. And Rolling Thunder said, no, there's a better way. And so he had his people videotape the tractors. And after the videotaping was done, he had them pour sand into the tanks of the tractors, so the next morning the tractors couldn't move. Mm. In the meantime, his people flew the videotape to Washington, D.C., tried to get senators interested in it. The only senator who was interested was Senator Ted Kennedy. Oh. Yeah, who was very incensed by this. The story goes that he took this to Nixon, and Nixon immediately stopped the project himself. Executive order.
I see. Well, Stanley, you have written extensively about shamanism. And yes. Rolling Thunder was really largely regarded as a shaman, a person who had the uncanny abilities associated with shamanism.
Well, yes, and in our book, The Voice of Rolling Thunder, we described this in great depth. I wrote The Voice of Rolling Thunder with Rolling Thunder's grandson, by the way, Sidney Morningstar.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful experience because Sidney never knew his grandfather all that well, and he rediscovered his grandfather through all the interviews in the book and all the recordings that we excerpted from the book. Mm-hmm. But the point that I was making is that my definition of shamanism involves the fact that a community gives the shaman that title, whatever language it happens to be in, and then the shaman takes care of that community's health needs and spiritual needs. So, Rolling Thunder was operating as a medicine man for many, many years. Mm-hmm. But once he had his own community, for that period of time, he could legitimately be called a shaman.
And not just for Native Americans, but for the Association of Humanistic Psychology, for the Grateful Dead. I believe he even had an influence on Bob Dylan.
Well, Bob Dylan did attend some of Rolling Thunder's sunrise ceremonies, that's right. And one of Bob Dylan's tours was called the Rolling Thunder Review. Mm-hmm. I've talked with people who were on that tour, and they said that Bob Dylan never made a specific connection between the name of that review and the Rolling Thunder ceremonies. So who knows? Yeah. Of course, it's likely, but we can't really pin that down.
Oh, okay.
But the important thing is that Bob Dylan did have an association with Rolling Thunder and loved the sunrise ceremonies, as did many other people.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the shaman question. After Rolling Thunder's wife died after a long and protracted illness with cancer, which was very sad, and I would hypnotize her from time to time to alleviate the pain, the community fell apart. It's like Camelot, 10 years of glory of Metaton.
Mm-hmm.
And it's become a legend, and many people still talk about what they learned at Metaton and some of the wonderful experiences that they had there learning Native American ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Rolling Thunder himself became ill at some point
Oh,
after
good
that.
heavens, that's a whole other story. Incidentally, Rolling Thunder never called himself a shaman. And so he was always very, shall we say, low-key and modest in terms of the adulation that he received.
Well, I do remember attending a symposium in San Francisco back in the early 70s, sponsored by the Association for Humanistic Psychology, in which I think you probably arranged for Rolling Thunder to be a speaker, and it was a symposium on healing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was presented to the group as an example of a Native American healer.
Yes, that would be legitimate, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So he felt comfortable being called a healer, but not a shaman.
That's correct, yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
How did he distinguish?
Well, he didn't. He let other people do
Mm-hmm.
that. He would sometimes say, some people call me a shaman, but I never call myself a shaman.
Mm.
So he acknowledged that, but he was very careful to draw the line, healer, yes, medicine man, yes. And he always would talk about how he doctored people. So he wasn't adverse to using the word doctor.
Mm-hmm.
He did doctor some people quite effectively. Actually, the cover of our book, The Voice of Rolling Thunder, shows Rolling Thunder with an eagle. And there's quite a story behind that, because a young man by the name of Carey was given 3 months to live, and in desperation he sought out Rolling Thunder and got permission to stay with Rolling Thunder and get the sweat lodges, the herbal medicines, etc. After 6 months he was alive, well, and healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And after 8 months, it was time for him to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And he was with a friend, and on one of the last days that they were there, I should mention, Rolling Thunder never let him photograph him, even though his profession was a photographer.
I see.
He said, we're going to wait for the right time. On one of the last days he was there, Carey's friend brought this injured eagle, this injured baby eagle, who had some malfunction to its wing. Maybe it had fallen out of the nest, but the poor thing couldn't fly. And so he said, put it in a paper sack because it's squawking so loud, and in the dark maybe it'll stop squawking, and it did. They took it to Rolling Thunder, and Rolling Thunder took the eagle out of the bag. The eagle stopped squawking, and Rolling Thunder patted the eagle, and the eagle calmed down. He said to Carey, now you can take your photograph. And that's the photograph on the book.
Oh.
Moments after he took the photograph, the eagle flew back to the nest.
How priceless.
Wing fine.
Mm-hmm.
The wing was fine. Now I'll tell you the owl story.
Let's hear the owl story.
Yes, yes. I visited Rolling Thunder as often as I could over the years, and he always had a surprise for me. One time when I visited him, he said, I need you to do some hypnosis. He knew that I was a hypnotic practitioner and incidentally a member of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, the Society for Clinical and Experimental Hypnosis, and so I do have my hypnosis credentials.
In fact, you used hypnosis with Mickey Hart, the drummer for the
I should mention that in a
Dead.
minute, yes. Thank you for reminding me, because there was a tie-in with Rolling Thunder there. So anyway, Rolling Thunder said, you know, we have this Native American guy who was an alcoholic. He came to me for doctoring, and I've got him to the point where we were almost got him sober. He's been in sweat lodges. He's taken herbal medicines. He's been drinking herbal tea. He hasn't touched a drop of alcohol, but we really need to impress upon him the importance of remaining sober. I said, fine, I'll interview him. I'll see what type of hypnosis is appropriate for him. Oh, no, you've got to do it tonight. The ceremony's already started. I just had gotten off the airplane. Mm-hmm. So I came to the campfire. The campfire was roaring. People were drumming. They had been drumming for an hour and chanting and singing for an hour. And there Robert, the doctor's patient in the session, mm-hmm. was right in the middle of the campfire, sitting on a chair, taking it all in. So Rolling Thunder brought me to another chair, and so there I was, supposed to hypnotize Robert as part of Rolling Thunder's doctoring. On the spur of the moment, I didn't even know if I would be successful or not. Yeah. So I used a standard procedure, having him close his eyes and do some imagination. And then once I felt that he was suggestible enough, I said, Robert, I'd like you to get the image of the alcohol that's ruining your life. So you got the image of a monster. I said, now you've got a community of at least 50 people around you. And they're going to give you something to kill the monster. Oh, yes, they're giving me a bow and an arrow. Okay, shoot the monster. He shot the monster. Okay, now you've got to find a substitute for the alcohol. What are you going to drink? Herbal tea. I said, fine. Whenever you have a craving for alcohol, visualize the monster, imagine shooting the monster, and then have some real herbal tea. And that will complete the cycle. So he did. He did. And months later, years later, in fact, after 2 years, he was still sober. Mm. But where the owl comes in, after the hypnosis, Rolling Thunder came out in his white buckskin suit and said, I hope you folks had noticed the hooting of the owl. I didn't hear an owl, but I didn't say anything about it. Oh, yes, we heard the owl, we heard the owl. I hope you hooted it 10 times. Oh, yes, 10 times. That owl is a symbol of death. 10 times, though, means Robert has a chance. I think he sort of invented that symbology, but what am I to say? So this is Robert's last chance. So then he took an eagle feather and started to poke Robert in various places. When he winced, that's when Rolling Thunder took his mouth and did what we call a cupping and sucking movement and spit some terrible reddish-black stuff into a pail. Oh. So that symbolizes the poison in your body. Well, it was probably tobacco juice, but that doesn't matter. It was a symbolism that counts. He said, take that off and bury it, get as far away from the camp as possible. Sent one of his spiritual warriors off with the pail. And so that was the combination of hypnosis and purification, along with social support, that made this poor alcoholic Indian sober.
Well, Stanley Krippner, what a wonderful story. I'd love to hear more about your hypnosis with Mickey Hart, but it'll have to happen on another occasion.
Okay, we'll do that another interview.
We're out of time for now. Thank you once again.
You're welcome.
And thank you for being with us.